poor girl helped an old man cross the street, unaware he was the town's richest farmer. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to our main character. The morning sun had barely risen over Maple Creek when Lila crossed Main Street, her worn sneakers splashing through shallow puddles left from last night's rain. She carried a paper bag of day-old bread from the bakery where she worked the early shift, her fingers stiff from the cold. Her paycheck barely covered rent, and her kid brother's medicine was due next week. But Lila never let anyone see how tired she really was. Ahead, the crosswalk light flickered from green to red. A frail old man stood frozen on the curb, clutching a cane, his grocery bag trembling in one hand. Cars rushed by, horns blaring. Lila hesitated only a heartbeat before running forward. "Sir, may I help you?" she called. The man blinked up at her, his pale eyes watery and confused. "I'm fine," he stammered, though his legs shook under him. "Please," she insisted, looping her arm through his gently. "It's all right. Let's go together." They stepped into the crosswalk just as a delivery truck rounded the corner too fast. Tires screeched, and Lila yanked the old man toward safety, her heart hammering. The truck roared past, spraying water across their feet. The man gasped, then laughed softly, his voice rough like gravel. "You've got quick hands, young lady." "Not many folks stop anymore." Lila smiled, still catching her breath. "Well, I guess I was due for some good karma." She brushed the rain from her jacket and handed him the paper bag. "Here, it's just some bread. You should eat something warm." He looked at it, stunned. "You're giving this to me?" "It's fine," she said. "I'll get more later." The light turned red again, trapping them on the sidewalk. The man studied her face as if searching for something familiar. "What's your name, miss?" "Lila," she replied, tucking a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "Lila Brooks." "Good name," he murmured. "Strong name, the kind that doesn't give up." She laughed awkwardly, unsure what to say. "Well, I try." A pickup pulled to the curb, and the driver leaned out. "Hey, Mr. Hayes, you need a lift?" The old man waved him off. "No, son, this young lady's got me taken care of." Lila blinked. Mr. Hayes. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Thank you, Lila," he said quietly, his fingers gripping her hand for a second longer than expected. "Kindness like yours, it's rare these days." She shrugged, embarrassed. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Not anyone." He nodded once, then shuffled away, his cane tapping the wet pavement until he disappeared around the corner. Lila exhaled and glanced at the empty street. The drizzle picked up again, glimmering under the traffic lights. She didn't know it yet, but that small moment, one simple act of compassion, was about to change the course of her entire life. The rain had stopped by the time Lila finished her shift at the bakery that evening, but the clouds still hung low over Maple Creek. The scent of sugar and bread clung to her apron as she stepped out into the cool air, clutching her small envelope of tips. $15. She sighed softly. It was barely enough for groceries, let alone her brother's medication. Still, she smiled when she reached the corner pharmacy. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed quietly, and the pharmacist, Mrs. Palmer, looked up with gentle pity. "I am sorry, sweetheart. The insurance still has not gone through. The antibiotics are $98. Lila's heart sank. "Can I pay half now?" she asked hopefully. Mrs. Palmer shook her head. "They only release full prescriptions, honey." Lila nodded, thanked her politely, and stepped outside again. The cold bit through her jacket. She tightened her grip on the envelope, walking home past the quiet shop fronts. Her brother Ethan would ask how the day went. She would tell him it was fine. She always did. Their small house sat at the edge of town, the porch sagging, the windows fogged from the old heater that coughed more than it worked. Inside, Ethan was waiting at the table, his math homework spread across a stack of old magazines. "Hey, how was work?" he asked, his voice bright despite the wheeze in his chest. "Busy," Lila said, setting down her bag and tousling his hair. "We sold out before noon." She forced a smile, opening the fridge. Half a gallon of milk, 2 eggs, and a jar of jam. She made them toast, pretending it was a feast. "You will finish your medicine tomorrow," she promised. "I am just waiting for the new batch." He nodded, believing her, and that belief hurt more than any hunger. After he fell asleep, Lila sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. She pulled out her sketchbook from under the cushion, a gift from her late mother, and flipped through the pages. Drawings of small bakeries, people laughing, sunlight falling across loaves of bread. Her dream had always been to open a bakery of her own, a place called Warm Hands. But dreams did not pay bills. She ran her fingers over one sketch, a storefront window with flowers and the words, "Made with love." She whispered, "Maybe someday." The next morning came gray and heavy. She woke early, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and set off for her second job at Miller's farm on the outskirts of town. The mud was thick from last night's rain, clinging to her shoes as she crossed the fields. The air smelled of hay and diesel. Mr. Miller, the foreman, barked orders at the workers, and Lila joined the line hauling crates of feed to the barn. Her back ached, but she pushed through. At least the work was honest. During her lunch break, she sat by the fence, eating a cold sandwich and watching the clouds move over the hills. Her phone buzzed with a message from the landlord, "Rent due by Friday, or I have to list the unit." She closed her eyes and breathed slowly. Friday was only 3 days away. She looked at her hands cracked from flour and work and whispered, "We will make it, Ethan." As she stood to head back, a familiar voice carried across the wind. "Miss Brooks?" She turned, startled. Walking toward her was the same old man from yesterday, cane in hand, but this time dressed neatly in a brown vest and clean boots. "Mr. Hayes?" she said in disbelief. He smiled warmly. "I thought I recognized those quick hands. You saved me from that truck yesterday." Lila laughed nervously. "You remembered." "Hard to forget someone who risks her life for a stranger," he said. "Do you work here?" "Yes, sir, just part-time." Mr. Hayes looked around the muddy field, then back at her. "This is hard work for someone who belongs in a bakery, not a barn." Lila blinked. "How did you—" He held up the paper bag she had given him, carefully folded and tucked under his arm. "Your bread," he said softly. "Best I have had in years." She flushed. "It was just leftovers." "It was kindness," he corrected. "And that is something this town could use more of." He studied her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "Would you come by my farm tomorrow? I could use someone with your hands and your heart." Lila hesitated. "I do not know. I already have 2 jobs. Then maybe it is time for a better one," he said, smiling faintly before turning away down the path. Lila watched him go, the morning light catching the edge of his silver hair. She did not know it yet, but that offer was the first step toward a life she had never dared to imagine. The following morning, the sky over Maple Creek shimmered in a pale golden hue as Lila made her way toward the far edge of town. The air smelled of dew and wheat, and the gravel road crunched beneath her worn shoes. She had almost convinced herself not to go, but curiosity and a quiet voice inside her heart pushed her forward. Mr. Hayes had asked her to visit his farm, and even though it sounded too good to be true, something about his eyes yesterday, kind yet serious, made her believe he meant every word. When she reached the entrance, she stopped in awe. The place was enormous, a sea of green pastures stretching as far as she could see, barns freshly painted in red, fences white as bone. The gate bore a carved sign that read, "Hayes Family Acres." She hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. A few workers nodded to her politely as she crossed the yard. Chickens clucked nearby, and the sound of a tractor hummed in the distance. Mr. Hayes stood near the stables, talking with a young man in overalls. When he saw her, his face broke into a genuine smile. "You came," he said. "I was not sure if you would." "I almost did not," Lila admitted. "I thought maybe you were joking." "I never joke about work," he said with a twinkle in his eye. "Come, let me show you something." He led her around the corner to a greenhouse filled with rows of herbs, vegetables, and flowers. The smell of soil and mint filled the air. "I have been trying to start a small organic garden project," he explained. "It is meant to provide free produce for families who cannot afford groceries. But my back does not let me do much anymore, and my workers are too busy with the main crops." Lila's eyes softened. "That sounds amazing, but why ask me, Mr.?" Hayes looked at her hands again, the same way he had before. "Because when you helped me cross that street, you did not hesitate. You saw a need and acted. That is the kind of heart this place needs." She blushed, unsure what to say. "I do not know much about gardening," she murmured. "You will learn," he said. "If you want the job, it is yours." She blinked. "Job? You mean like a real position?" he chuckled. "Unless you prefer working in the mud at Miller's farm." Lila smiled for the first time that morning. "When do I start?" "Right now," he said. He handed her a pair of gloves and pointed to a row of empty soil beds. "Plant these first. Tomatoes are forgiving. They just need patience." As the morning passed, Lila worked quietly, hands deep in the earth, the sun warming her back. Mr. Hayes occasionally checked in, offering small tips and stories about the land, how his father had started with nothing but 2 acres and a mule, how every harvest since then had been built on grit and faith. There was something comforting in his voice, a calm strength that reminded her of her mother. By noon, she wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked around the greenhouse with pride. The empty soil beds now carried neat rows of seedlings. Mr. Hayes watched from the doorway, nodding in approval. "You did well," he said. "Better than most I have hired." "Thank you, sir," she replied. "It feels peaceful here." "That is how you know you are where you belong," he said. He handed her a small envelope. "It is not much, just your first day's pay. Come back tomorrow if you want to continue." Lila opened it, expecting a few bills, but inside was a crisp check for $200. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Hayes, this is too much." "It is fair," he said simply. "Good work deserves good pay." Lila stood speechless as he tipped his hat and walked away toward the barn. She clutched the envelope, heart pounding. $200 could cover her brother's medicine, maybe even a week's rent. As she walked home later that afternoon, the golden light of sunset stretched across the fields, painting everything in warm shades of amber. She looked at her hands, still dusty from soil, and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in a long while, she felt hope rising, not the fragile kind that fades overnight, but something steady, like the roots she had planted in the greenhouse that morning. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a season that would change both her life and Mr. Hayes's forever. The next few weeks moved like a quiet rhythm through Maple Creek. Every morning, Lila arrived at Hayes Family Acres before the sun had fully risen, the mist still floating above the wheat fields like a soft blanket. She worked tirelessly in the greenhouse, her hands learning the language of soil and sunlight. What started as simple planting soon turned into tending, pruning, watering, and recording the growth of each plant as though they were her own children. Mr. Hayes often visited her during those hours, leaning on his cane, sometimes sharing stories, sometimes just standing silently beside her, the two of them surrounded by the smell of fresh basil and damp earth. One morning, he surprised her with a small wooden crate filled with baking tools. "You said you worked at the bakery," he said. "I thought you could use these." Lila blinked, touched. "I cannot accept this." "You can and you will," he said kindly. "Consider it a trade. You grow food, you bake it into something worth remembering." That afternoon, she used his kitchen for the first time, baking small loaves of bread with herbs from the garden. The scent filled the farmhouse, warm and familiar. When Mr. Hayes took a bite, he closed his eyes and said softly, "Tastes like home." It became their small routine. She would bake. He would share stories from his youth. One day, he told her about his wife, Margaret, who had passed away 5 years earlier. "She was the heart of this farm," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "After she was gone, I stopped doing much of anything. The workers kept the land alive, but the joy that was gone." Lila listened quietly, understanding more than she said. She knew what it meant to lose someone who made life worth fighting for. That evening, she wrote his words down in her sketchbook, next to a small drawing of the greenhouse. On the following Sunday, Mr. Hayes invited her to lunch in town. They sat at a small diner near the church, and people kept greeting him with respect, tipping their hats. One woman whispered to her friend, "That is Henry Hayes, the richest man in the county." Lila almost dropped her fork. She looked at him in disbelief, but he only smiled knowingly. "You did not know, did you?" She shook her head slowly. "I thought you were well, just an old farmer." "I am," he said with a laugh. "Money never changed that. I built this farm with my hands, same as you are doing now." For a moment she was silent, unsure how to act around him now that she knew. He noticed her hesitation. "Lila," he said gently, "do not let a number in the bank decide how you see people. Kindness weighs more than gold, and you have that in abundance." His words stayed with her long after they left the diner. Over the next few days, she worked even harder, managing the greenhouse with new energy. Mr. Hayes watched her from a distance, impressed by her dedication. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, he joined her by the rows of tomato plants. You remind me of Margaret, he said softly. She believed small things could change the world: one seed, one loaf, one act of kindness. Lila felt her throat tighten. She sounds like someone I would have liked to know. He smiled faintly. You would have been friends. A gentle silence followed, filled only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Then, unexpectedly, he placed a folded envelope in her hand. What is this? She asked. Just something I want you to read later, he replied. That night, when she opened it at home, she found a letter written in his careful handwriting. It said, Lila, I see in you the courage and honesty that built this land. If you ever doubt your worth, remember that you already have everything it takes to make a better life, not just for yourself, but for others too. Her eyes filled with tears as she folded the letter close to her heart. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wheat. For the first time in years, Lila allowed herself to believe that good things might truly last. What she did not know was that Mr. Hayes's kindness was only beginning, and that the biggest reveal of her life was still waiting just beyond the next sunrise. Days turned into weeks, and Hayes' family acres began to bloom in ways it had not for years. Under Lila's careful touch, the greenhouse became a sanctuary of color and life. The once empty tables were now filled with rows of tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and flowers. Every morning, she arrived before dawn, humming softly as she worked, and every evening Mr. Hayes would walk down the path to check on her progress. They had fallen into a rhythm that felt natural, almost like family. One bright Saturday morning, Mr. Hayes called out to her from the barn. Lila, I have a surprise for you, he said with a mischievous smile. He led her to the back of the property, where a small wooden shed stood unused. When he opened the door, she gasped. Inside were bags of flour, sugar, and boxes of baking supplies. A new oven stood against the wall, still wrapped in plastic. What is all this? She asked, speechless. You said your dream was to open a bakery, he replied. So why not start here? I want you to use this place as your workshop. Bake your bread, try new recipes. Call it practice for when your own bakery opens one day. Her throat tightened as tears filled her eyes. Mr. Hayes, I do not know what to say. Say yes, he said simply. That will be enough. She nodded, unable to speak, and hugged him without thinking. The old man froze for a second, then chuckled softly, patting her shoulder. You have a good heart, Lila. Never lose it. From that day on, her life changed again. Each morning after tending to the greenhouse, she spent hours in the little shed, baking bread and pies for the farmhands. The smell drifted across the fields, warm and sweet, bringing people together. Mr. Hayes often sat outside on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the workers gather, laugh, and share her food. It reminded him of the old days, of Margaret's laughter echoing through these same fields. One afternoon, as they sat together watching the sunset, he said quietly, Lila, you have brought this farm back to life. I had almost forgotten what joy felt like. You did that yourself, she said. You just needed someone to remind you. He smiled faintly, but there was something distant in his eyes, something she could not read. Later that week, a black luxury car pulled into the driveway. A tall man in a suit stepped out, looking impatient. Lila was washing her hands outside when she saw him walk straight toward Mr. Hayes. Uncle Henry, the man said, his voice clipped. We need to talk about the will. Lila froze, unsure if she should leave. Mr. Hayes frowned. Ethan, this is not the time. It never is, the man snapped. You keep wasting money on strangers and charity projects. Do you have any idea how this looks? Lila turned to go, embarrassed to be standing there, but Mr. Hayes's voice stopped her. Lila, stay. You deserve to hear this. Ethan shot her a cold glare. So this is the new charity case? I should have guessed. Lila's cheeks burned, but she said nothing. Mr. Hayes's voice was calm but firm. You forget yourself, nephew. Lila is an employee and a friend. Watch your tone. Ethan laughed bitterly. Employee? Please. Everyone in town is talking. You think people do not notice that you are giving away your money to some girl you barely know? Mr. Hayes's eyes hardened. It is my money, my choice, and I choose to invest in kindness, something you have not learned. The younger man scoffed, shook his head, and stormed off toward his car. The tires spat gravel as he drove away. Lila stood silently, her heart pounding. I am sorry, she whispered. I did not mean to cause trouble. Mr. Hayes turned to her and smiled faintly. You did nothing wrong. Some people see the world through fear, not gratitude. He looked at the horizon where the sun dipped behind the barn. Do not worry about him. The world has a way of revealing true intentions. That evening, as Lila locked up the shed, she thought about his words. She knew there was more to the story, more than he was telling her. The wind picked up, rustling the wheat, and she hugged herself against the chill. Somewhere deep down, she felt that change was coming again, only this time, it would not be as gentle as before. The days that followed were quiet, yet the air around Hayes Family Acres carried a new kind of tension. The workers still smiled when they passed Lila, but she could feel the whispers when they thought she was not listening. Mr. Hayes pretended not to notice, though his eyes grew tired more often now. One afternoon, while she was arranging crates of vegetables for delivery, he called out from the porch, "Lila, come sit a moment." She wiped her hands on her apron and joined him. He poured 2 glasses of lemonade and handed her one. "I need to tell you something," he said after a long pause, "about what happened the other day with my nephew." Lila hesitated. "You do not have to explain anything to me, Mr. Hayes." "I do," he insisted gently. "Ethan has always believed that wealth means control. He does not understand that generosity can build more than money ever could. I have spent my life working for this land, and I will not let greed destroy it." Lila listened quietly. The late afternoon sun painted his face in warm light, and she could see the years carved into his features. "I want you to promise me something," he said. "Whatever happens next, you will keep doing what you do here, building, growing, giving." She frowned slightly. "You talk as if something bad is coming." He smiled faintly. "Change is not always bad, child. Sometimes it just comes sooner than expected." Before she could ask what he meant, he stood up and walked back toward the house, leaving her with more questions than answers. The next morning, he was not at the farm. His truck was gone, and his phone went straight to voicemail. The workers said he had left early for a meeting in the city. But when he did not return by evening, unease settled over everyone. Lila tried to shake off the worry, focusing on her baking, but she burned the bread twice that night. It was past midnight when headlights flashed across the window. She rushed outside, heart pounding, only to see Mr. Hayes' truck pulling into the drive. He climbed out slowly, his movements stiff. "Mr. Hayes, are you all right?" she asked, running to him. His face was pale, his hand gripping his chest. "Just a little tired," he said with a weak smile. "Long day." "You should sit down," she urged. "Let me call a doctor." "No doctors," he said firmly. "Just some water." She guided him inside, helping him to the couch. His breathing eased after a while, and he waved her off. "Do not fuss. I will be fine." But the next morning, when Lila came to check on him, she found him slumped over at the kitchen table, unconscious. Panic surged through her. She called the ambulance, her hands trembling as she explained the situation. The paramedics arrived within minutes, rushing him to the hospital in town. Lila followed close behind, her heart pounding with fear. Hours later, she sat in the waiting room, the smell of antiseptic filling her nose. A doctor approached, his expression calm but serious. "He had a mild heart attack," he said. "He is stable for now, but he needs rest. Are you family?" Lila shook her head quickly. "No, just a friend." The doctor nodded. "Then he is lucky to have you. Stress and overwork can be harder on someone his age than they realize." When she finally saw Mr. Hayes, he looked small in the hospital bed, the strength she had always seen in him replaced by a fragile stillness. He opened his eyes slowly. "You should not have stayed," he whispered. "Of course I should," she said softly. "You would have done the same for me." He smiled weakly. "You are stubborn, like Margaret." His fingers brushed hers, trembling. "Promise me you will not let this place fall apart. Promise you will protect it." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "I promise." He squeezed her hand before closing his eyes again, his breathing slow but steady. That night, as Lila walked back through the empty farmhouse, the walls seemed to echo with silence. The smell of his coffee lingered in the air, the cup still half full on the counter. She set it aside gently and looked out at the dark fields beyond the window. The moonlight fell across the wheat like silver waves, and she whispered to the night, "You have done enough for everyone, Mr. Hayes. Let me take care of you now." Somewhere deep inside, she knew that nothing at Hayes Family Acres would ever be the same again. Mr. Hayes stayed in the hospital for several days, and during that time, Lila took charge of everything at the farm. She managed the greenhouse, kept track of deliveries, and coordinated with the workers who trusted her completely. Every evening, she visited him at the hospital, bringing fresh bread or flowers from the garden. His strength was returning slowly, but his spirit seemed brighter whenever she walked into the room. "You are keeping my land alive, aren't you?" he would tease gently. "Trying my best," she always replied. When he was finally released, the whole town seemed to breathe again. Lila drove him home, the air filled with the smell of cut grass and rain. "You should rest," she said as she helped him up the porch steps. "Doctor's orders. Rest is for old men," he said with a wink, though his steps were unsteady. "And what are you then?" she teased, smiling. "A farmer with unfinished business," he replied. That evening, while she made soup in the kitchen, he sat by the window gazing out at the fields. "Lila," he said quietly, "I need to make sure this farm is in the right hands. I want to change my will." She froze, the spoon clattering against the pot. "Mr. Hayes, you do not have to do that." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "I have seen what greed can do. My nephew thinks money defines worth, but kindness is what keeps the world turning. I want you to have a share in this place, not as charity, but as partnership." Lila shook her head quickly. "I cannot accept that. It would not feel right." "Then consider it a promise kept," he said. "I told you this farm needed your heart. Now it has it." She turned away, her throat tightening. "Let us talk about it later," she whispered. But later came sooner than she expected. 2 days after his return, his nephew Ethan arrived again, this time with a lawyer in tow. Lila was tending to the greenhouse when she heard angry voices from the porch. "Uncle, this is madness," Ethan shouted. "You cannot just hand over property to some girl who wandered in off the street." Mr. Hayes's voice was calm but firm. "She is not some girl. She saved my life in more ways than one. She kept this farm alive while you were too busy chasing profits." "That is not the point," Ethan snapped. "You are not thinking clearly. People will think she manipulated you." Lila stepped into view, her heart pounding. "I never asked for anything," she said quietly. "All I ever wanted was to help." Ethan turned on her, his eyes cold. "Help yourself, you mean? You think kindness pays rent? You are playing a dangerous game, miss." "That is enough, mister," Hayes said sharply. "If you cannot show respect, leave my property." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but Ethan's anger flared. "You will regret this," he hissed. "You have no idea what people are saying." He stormed off toward his car, tires screeching down the driveway once again. Lila turned to Mr. Hayes, tears stinging her eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Maybe I should leave for a while." "You will do no such thing," he said. "Do not let fear drive you from what is rightfully yours." But his words only deepened her worry. That night, as she walked home through the fields, doubt crept in. She thought about how people in town looked at her differently now, how whispers followed her at the market. By the time she reached her porch, her resolve had begun to crumble. She sat at the table, staring at the letter he had once written her, the one that said she had everything she needed to make a better life. "Maybe he is wrong," she said softly to herself. "Maybe people like me do not belong in a world like his." The next morning she wrote a note and left it on the counter. "Thank you for everything. I owe you more than I can say, but it is time I stand on my own." She packed her small bag, tears falling as she closed the door behind her. Back at Hayes Family Acres, Mr. Hayes found the note a few hours later. His hands shook as he read it. "Oh, child," he whispered, "you still do not understand. You are the best thing that ever happened to this place." He sat down heavily, the weight of loss pressing on his chest again, heavier than any heartache he had felt since Margaret's passing. The morning air in Maple Creek felt heavier after Lila left. The greenhouse seemed quieter, the workers slower, and even the animals sensed something missing. Mr. Hayes tried to keep his routine, but every corner of the farm reminded him of her. The little bakery shed still smelled faintly of cinnamon and herbs, and the loaves she had baked were now just crumbs in a glass jar on the counter. He sat on the porch one evening, the letter she left folded neatly in his hand, when his lawyer drove up the path. "Henry, we have a problem," the man said. "Your nephew has filed a petition to contest your estate. He claims you are mentally unfit and that Lila manipulated you." Mr. Hayes' face hardened. "That boy is digging his own grave with greed. You will need to appear in court to dispute it," the lawyer continued. "But if Lila is gone, her absence will only make his case stronger." Mr. Hayes looked out toward the road that led into town, his mind already made up. "Then we find her," he said. Meanwhile, Lila had taken a small room above the bakery where she used to work. The owner, Mrs. Palmer, welcomed her back kindly but noticed the sadness in her eyes. "You look like a girl who left her heart somewhere," she said gently. "Maybe I did," Lila admitted. She tried to throw herself into work, kneading dough from dawn to dusk. Yet everything reminded her of Hayes family acres, the smell of the fields, the sound of the greenhouse door creaking, the way Mr. Hayes always said her name like it meant something. A week passed before she saw the newspaper headline that made her stop mid-step. "Local farmer faces estate dispute, nephew claims fraud." The photo beneath it showed Mr. Hayes being helped into a courthouse. Her breath caught. "He is fighting alone," she whispered. Without a second thought, she pulled off her apron and ran to the bus station, clutching her savings envelope in one hand. The trip back to Maple Creek felt endless. When she arrived, the courthouse steps were already crowded. Reporters murmured, flashing cameras as Mr. Hayes stood before the judge, his voice firm but tired. "This land is mine to give," he declared, "and I have chosen to give it to someone who understands its worth." Ethan scoffed loudly. "To a girl you barely know," he said. "To a girl who took advantage of your loneliness?" The room buzzed with whispers. Lila pushed her way through the doors, her heart hammering. "That is not true," she called out. All eyes turned as she stepped forward, her clothes dusted from travel, her voice steady. "He is not unfit, and he was never manipulated. Mr. Hayes gave because that is who he is. I never asked for anything." The judge raised a brow. "And who are you, miss?" "Lila Brooks," she said softly. "I worked with him. I watched him give to people who never said thank you. He taught me that kindness is not weakness, it is strength." She turned toward Ethan. "You think wealth makes you powerful, but it only makes you smaller if you forget where it came from." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The judge looked at Mr. Hayes, then back at her. "Miss Brooks, would you be willing to testify on record?" "Yes," she said. Her voice trembled at first, but she told the story of how she had met him, how he had helped her rebuild her life through work and trust. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. The judge leaned forward. "It seems to me that this young woman's honesty speaks for itself." Case dismissed. Ethan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. "Mr." Hayes turned to Lila, his eyes bright with tears. "You came back," he said. "I could not let you fight alone," she whispered. He took her hand, the lines of age, and worked deep against her soft fingers. "I told you this farm needed your heart," he said. "Now maybe you see why." Outside, the sky broke open with gentle rain, washing the dust from the courthouse steps. As they walked out together, Lila felt something shift deep inside her. She was no longer the poor girl who had helped a stranger cross the street. She was part of something bigger, proof that kindness could stand taller than greed, and that some promises once made could never be broken. Weeks passed after the court hearing, and peace slowly returned to Hayes family acres. The land seemed to breathe again, the wheat fields swaying softly under the golden sun, the greenhouse alive with color and scent. Lila had moved back into the farmhouse, at Mr. Hayes's insistence, though she still insisted on earning her keep. Every morning she rose before dawn, lighting the oven in the bakery shed and carrying warm loaves to the workers before they started their day. Mr. Hayes would sit on the porch with his coffee, watching her cross the yard, his heart full of quiet pride. "You turned this place into something better than I ever dreamed," he told her one morning. "You did that, not me," she replied, smiling. "I just watered what you planted." "That is exactly how life works," he said softly. "One person plants, another helps it grow." The townspeople began to see the change too. They no longer whispered when they passed Lila in town. Instead, they waved, greeted her by name, and came to the farm to buy bread or fresh produce. The story of the poor girl who helped the richest farmer in town had become a symbol of hope. One Saturday afternoon, Mr. Hayes called everyone to the farmhouse yard. The workers, neighbors, and even a few people from town gathered under the big oak tree. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice strong again. "This farm will now be known as Warm Hands Acres, named after someone whose kindness saved not just my life, but the spirit of this place." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Lila blinked in shock. "Hayes, you cannot name the farm after me," she whispered. "I already have," he said simply. "And there is more. From this day forward, Warm Hands Acres will serve as a community trust. It will belong to the people of Maple Creek, the workers, the families, and anyone willing to give their hands and hearts to keep it alive." The crowd erupted in applause, and Lila's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Hayes continued, "I will not be here forever, but I want to leave behind something that keeps giving. and I trust Lila Brooks to lead it." She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "Hayes, I cannot, you already are," he interrupted with a smile. The following months became a new chapter for everyone. The greenhouse expanded into a learning center for students. The bakery shed turned into a small cafe that served fresh bread and soup to anyone who needed it, whether they could pay or not. Lila worked long hours, but she did it with joy, knowing that everything she touched now had meaning. One evening, she found Mr. Hayes sitting in the greenhouse, the setting sun washing everything in amber light. He looked peaceful, his hat resting on his knee. "You built something beautiful," she said softly. "We built it," he corrected. "You reminded me that the worth of a life is measured by the love we give, not the money we keep." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes kind and full of pride. "When I first met you, I thought I was the one helping you across the street," he said with a chuckle. "Turns out, you were the one helping me find my way back." She laughed through her tears. "You always were stubborn, Mr. Hayes. So are you," he said. "That is why this place will be just fine." In the years that followed, Warm Hands Acres became a beacon of hope across the county. People came not just to buy produce, but to learn about generosity and community. Lila kept Mr. Hayes's old letter framed in her bakery, the one that said she had everything she needed to make a better life. When he passed peacefully one autumn night, the town gathered under the same oak tree to honor him. Lila stood before them, holding a small loaf of bread baked from the wheat he had planted years ago. "He taught me that kindness is not a weakness," she said, her voice steady. "It is a seed. You plant it once, and it grows forever." She placed the loaf beneath the tree, her tears mixing with the morning dew. The wind carried the scent of bread across the fields, and in that moment, it felt as though Henry Hayes was still there, smiling, proud, and watching over the land he had loved. The sun rose higher, glinting off the golden wheat, and Lila whispered, "Thank you for believing in me. I will keep your promise." And so she did, every day for the rest of her life.